Welcome to Now That's Bass. I'm Pete Roythorne, and this is your weekly dose of bass insights. Thanks for joining us, and feel free to share your own insights and experiences in the comments. Welcome back, and thank you for joining the Now That's Bass podcast again. There are people that play bass, and then there are people that genuinely take the instrument to another level. Today's guest definitely falls into the latter category. He's a trailblazer, both in terms of how we use technology for the sound, but also how we build our careers in the industry. He's also a writer, educator, and speaker. Welcome to the show, Dr. Steve Lawson.
Thank you for that. That's really nice. It's nice to have other people describe me like that rather than having to do it myself. Writing bogus third-person bios that are actually me saying it, but I'm trying to pretend it's not. So you've actually got a face and you're saying it, so that's good. Yeah. Well, turn up to any gig of mine and say nice things. I did a gig in I only played in New York once, and there was a local radio guy who had been playing my music on his show for years. This was like mid-noughties, but he was a big fan, and he showed up and he said, "Can I introduce you?" And he said the most extraordinary things that you would think that, I don't know, like that Jacko had come back from the dead or something. It was like this extraordinary intro, and I was like, how can I play after that? I'm going to be a disappointment. No matter how good I am, I'm not going to live up to that. So can you please never do that again? So I was like, I'd much rather people had lower expectations and were wowed than thought that I was amazing and then went, oh yeah, it was all right. So yeah, but in a talking context, that was very much appreciated. So thank you.
Yes, no, that's all right. As you say, it's always a case of under promise, over deliver.
Exactly. Yeah. That's been my motto for a very long time. Yeah.
So one thing I would like to say right at the start is interesting. You are the first doctor that I've had on my show.
Hey, well, there's very few of us kind of in the world of bass that have PhDs. I mean, there are a handful around. And there are a handful of people who call themselves doctor that aren't, because they fix things. And it's like, and I get that as kind of there's a common usage of a doctor being someone who repairs things, anthropomorphic relationship to instruments. But no, that's kind of nice to know. That's good. Yeah. And especially after it taking me 10 years, I'm going to use it in any way I can.
Absolutely, I think so. You should, and I'll dive into that. I'll dive into that kind of later in the interview, because I think there's some kind of interesting things I'd like to kind of discuss around that and around that. Kind of how it's kind of changed your attitude or influenced your attitude towards music. But for the moment, let's start right at the beginning. What actually brought you to the bass?
So this is my 40th year of playing bass.
Wow!
I started when I got a bass for my 14th birthday, but it was I actually got it a few months shy of that. So it was so November, I think, this year, or October this year will be 40th anniversary of me getting a bass. And it was really simple. We just moved, my family had just moved from Wimbledon in London to Berwick-on-Tweed, which is a fairly kind of a bit of a shock to the system. But the kid next door played drums. And so I just kind of, so I was going into a new high school, and the high school was a merger of all these middle schools. And so there was a whole bunch of people renegotiating who they knew and what they knew, which was kind of handy because there was no hierarchy established that I had to go into. But it just meant I kind of fell in with the musician crowd. And I already played trumpet and violin and given them both up because I was really bad at them. I tried piano. There's a hilarious quote from my mum. When I was about 14, she said to one of her friends, she said, "Oh, well, at least the other two are musical." And it was like, I'm so glad she never told me, because that would have been quite damning, but she was incredibly supportive. And so I got a bass, and I wanted a bass because the kid Heath next door played drums. And so I bought this bass for 25 quid off a school teacher. And I mean, and my motivation was that my favourite member of all my favourite bands was the bass player. So Kurt Smith in Tears for Fears, John Taylor in Duran. And then I saw, so it would have been earlier in 86, Level 42 were on some kids' TV show doing a gear giveaway. And Mike Lindup had a little keyboard and a little amp and a Boone, I guess it would have been at the time. Boone called it a guitar, a little amp. And Mark King had this, because he obviously, now we know it's just because he had a better endorsement deal than everybody else.
Yeah.
He had this massive Trace Elliott stack and a status bass and did his whole thumb nonsense. And I was like, yeah, that's the one. That's the one to play. He's clearly the coolest guy in this band. And, yeah, no, and so it was just, I kind of fell into it, but I was really bad at it. I was terribly bad at it. It was not a matter of me picking it up and then, I'd love to say I picked it up and immediately learned how to play Hair by Graham Central Station. But, and I didn't, and I was just getting into that. My music taste at the time was this kind of weird amalgam of, I was getting really into prog, but I was also listening to John Peel 3 nights a week.
Yeah.
So it was everything from Napalm Death to Yes, via the Cure. It was always a joke at school that I had no filter. That that I would go out and I would buy a George Benson record and an Anthrax record at the same time, and I didn't see that as odd.
But surely that's great. I mean, why pigeonhole yourself in one area? I mean, it's just take as many influences as you can from as many different areas.
I just think I hadn't really kind of, and I mean, Peel was a huge part of this because you was listening without prejudice, as George Michael would have put it. It was like we kind of came to music with this sense that all of it was kind of was up to be explored, and all of it was fascinating, and music that was bad was funny. So it wasn't even like I felt bad about listening to music that I didn't like. I never aggressively gatekept any of the areas of music that I liked, and I was part of a collection of music lovers at school. We were the weirdos, but when we've still got a WhatsApp group. We still chat.
But so we were,
but yeah, and that having that tiny little micro community, having access to John Peel, having a local record shop that sold cheap records, and at that point there were lots of 70s stuff was being reissued on Nice Price. I don't even remember the Nice Price series.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And I couldn't afford to spend £7 on a Chart album, but £2.99 for a Yes album or a James Taylor album or an AC/DC album or whatever it was that was reissued. I was like, cool, I can do that. And so I would just order records and became a voracious vinyl collector. And so bass kind of sat alongside that. But I got in a band fairly quickly and then broke my arm, so I couldn't play for a bit. And but I think they were probably trying to get rid of me anyway because I was rubbish. But so I got replaced by my then best friend. He took over on bass, and they became a really, really interesting. I mean, I think if I heard them now, I'd probably think they were terrible. But at the time, they were a fascinating kind of prog trio. But I borrowed a distortion pedal off one of them and sat at home with this plaster cast on my arm trying to hold a pick because I couldn't play my fingers, trying to learn Pixies and Jesus and Mary Chain tunes, but like learning the guitar parts as much as the bass parts. So that whole blurring of the lines between the bass's role and what the instrument will do started really early, and at the time there were no bass magazines, there was no bass media at all. So I would read Guitarist magazine at someone else's house and then go, oh, okay, so who's this Billy Sheehan guy? Who's this Jaco Pastorius guy? Who's this Stanley Clarke guy? And then go and try and find records by them that I could afford that were cheap. So that I bought a Stanley Clarke compilation and a Best of Weather Report, the Jaco years compilation in about 1988, 89, I guess, and went, oh, this is kind of interesting. Okay, maybe I'll do it. But I would just... Yeah, it was kind of just this weird thing where a lot of I didn't have a particularly good ear at the time. It's always funny when people talk about innate musicianship and they're like, "Oh, you're lucky, you've got a gift." I'm like, "Yeah, try telling that to my mum when I was 14. Try telling that to anybody who had to listen to me when I first went to college, because I went to music college just because I cocked up my A levels and I got into a level 3 national certificate course in Scotland, in Perth, which for the time was an amazing course. But yeah, I wasn't good. It wasn't like I got in and they went, oh, we're so lucky to have this genius here. Nobody would have gone, this guy's got a future career. They would have been like, wow, his time's really terrible. And,
so how did that, that's really interesting. So how did that, was there a point that suddenly changed? How did that change?
Well, I got a gig. So coming out of college, I met this Canadian kind of gospel singer, CCM dude, and he said, do you want to come and tour with me? Do you want to move to Lincoln and come and we'll tour as a duo? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. I was whatever, I was 19, 20, and so I spent a year and a half, maybe 2 years even, going around Europe with this guy and playing gigs in churches and youth clubs and the occasional kind of big arena. I think my second show with him was at the SEC in Glasgow, like to 3,500 people. And and on the day I went out and it was the worst UV rating in Scottish history, and I went out and got incredibly sunburned. which is like, how gets sunburn outside the Finney Memorial or whatever the big library is over there in
Exactly.
University. I got completely burnt, and then I came in, and halfway through the gig, my strap came off my bass and kind of swung out to one side, and I sort of did the second half of the song on my knee, and nobody noticed. It was that was the point where I realised, actually, bass is kind of felt, not even seen. Like if I'd stopped, they would have noticed. The bottom end would have, but nobody was actually watching what I was up to. So nobody came at the end and said, "Well, that bit where you drop your bass was really funny." It was like, no, just because I swung out, I swung it back, went onto one knee and played. It probably looked like choreography to them. But yeah, so I was doing this range of gigs with this dude, and it was amazing. I mean, it wasn't a particularly auspicious gig, but just gigging regularly was so useful. And gigging regularly in a setting where I couldn't just muck about. It wasn't me and some mates. It was a gig. I wasn't paid terribly, but it was I was hired. It was a job, and it took me probably 3 years after I left college to put into practice all of the things that I was meant to have learned at college. So I'd sort of stored them all up, but not actually applied them. And I kind of realized that both from a kind of very technical point of view, like sort of, dynamics and articulation and even sustain. Like I would listen to recordings and be like, why am I playing straight eighth notes with this really staccato feel? Like, that sounds rubbish. Like, that's, I'm just going to go, okay, well, I need to kind of learn to play with more sustain and not stop all those notes. But I also at the time was, because of the influence of Stu Ham and Billy Sheehan and that kind of thing, I was getting into like two-handed stuff. Like there was a time when if somebody would refer to me, they go, Steve, and that was the mime was them tapping. Like I was playing Chapman stick because I played because we were playing as a duo or sometimes with a drummer as a trio. There was a lot of space for me to and thinking about that in a kind of rock pop setting. I mean, he was a sort of Canadian Richard Marx wannabe, the guy. He's not a bad songwriter, but we were. But there was a lot of space for me to think about tapping and kind of extended technique, not as a show-off thing, not as a Billy Sheehan thing, but as a kind of orchestration, like as a way of kind of playing chords behind a solo or arranging it. So there were a couple of tunes that we did that became sort of feature spots for that. So I was all the way through, I was expanding the role because based on what I'd been doing when I was 14 and playing with this broken arm and trying to learn Darklands by the Jesus and Mary chain on bass. So like there was this loosening of the role of bass. There's this decoupling of the role of the bass from the instrument that happened really early on. That was a theme all the way through. And I think what was interesting was falling in love with the role as well. And that happened through teaching. That I think that the point at which I started to realize where the focus needed to be for somebody who was just playing in a straight band was like, well, I don't know. Even at 20, I didn't want to churn out a bunch of disciples. I didn't want a bunch of people who played like me. I wanted to resource them to play the music that they had in front of them, the music that they wanted to play, the music they could hear in their head as best as possible. And I probably wasn't. I'm guessing I wasn't a particularly good teacher back then, but the desire was there, and that meant that for each student I would focus on what it was they needed to do. So if they were in a covers band, I wasn't going, you need to learn to play chords and tap. It was no, this is the focus, and this is feel and tone, and that's how we emulate what other people are doing. How do we what are efficient ways of learning songs? And so all the way through I had this what now I would call a sort of student-centered approach to teaching, rather than I don't think I have any sort of philosophical or pedagogical framework for it at the time. But I always felt like that's what was required in doing a good job. Largely because what I was doing at the time was seen as really weird, like playing bass in a sort of somewhat extravagant or flamboyant way. Particularly when I started to play solo, not long after that, it was like telling someone you made your own shoes. They were like, "Wait, what? What do you mean you play bass on its own? Why would you do that? Did people just not like you? Is your hygiene really bad? Like, does no one be like nobody could get why? Like at that point, why anyone would want to do that? And when you think about who that most of the people who were doing it were even the ones for whom it was an art form, like Michael Manring. The place where people got to see Michael do it was a feature spot within a Michael Hedges gig. Stu Ham was doing clinics and kind of solo gigs associated with companies, but the vast majority of people saw him in his 5-minute Linus and Lucy spot with Joe Satriani. So the fact that I was taking it and doing it as a solo performance thing without an association with another artist, without it being clinics, that I was actually trying to do gigs with it. I mean, Jonas Hellborg had been doing it for 20 odd years by that point. He made the first ever solo electric bass record in 1979.
I remember it well.
Victor Wooten had been playing solo gigs in like doing new age ambient looping things before he met Bella Fleck. He would make his money sitting in the corner of a restaurant, trying out all that stuff. So Vic, who we think of as being the kind of the technique guy, was actually initially the looping and ambience guy. That was kind of where he came. So there were people who were doing, and there were other people who were very much kind of fellow travelers at that time who weren't particularly well known, or certainly outside of their area. There was a guy in Louisiana called Trip Wamsley, who is still plays, and was an extraordinary solo bass player and a lunatic. I mean, like in the best way. But like, you kind of have to be slightly unhinged. There's certainly at that point to want to do this.
I was going to say, because you touched on a few of those. I mean, certainly Jonas Hellborg was definitely sort of a little quirky, shall we say? And I mean, you've got Michael Manring as well. I mean, obviously those, you start throwing those people in, and they're not. You've got to be a certain type, I think, to push the bass or an instrument in the way that you guys have pushed it. And I'm really interested, just to take, when you were talking about the duo stuff, that's really, to me, that's really interesting, because I think that is an environment. And certainly I used to play in a duo, and it was like, as the bass player, you take on the lead role, the drums, the bass, the rhythm guitar, certainly, well, a little bit of rhythm guitar, but there's so much space for you to do that. And it is an amazing instrument to do that. So it's like, do you think in a way that was kind of like a breeding ground for really helping you explore the solo stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and again, so there were two things that really helped me out early on. One was the fact that I was trying to arrange parts that weren't about, this wasn't a bass show off gig. It was a singer-songwriter gig. And when we had the drummer or the tracks, it was a kind of polished 80s pop gig. And when it was just acoustic guitar and bass, it was a singer-songwriter thing. And so there was added value to me being kind of slightly flamboyant, but I couldn't show off. It wasn't a wanky gig. But also, because I grew up playing in church, that's another setting where you get to develop different kinds of skills. But if you do too much, then that's kind of, you're drawing attention to yourself, and that's obviously not the proper thing to do in that setting. So those were the two things, and so and both of them I stopped at a certain point, or certainly in at that as a sort of primary expression. But I think as a training ground, both of them gave me a place to start thinking about the instrument functionally. I'm always drawn back to the story of how Larry Graham started playing slap, because he played in a duo with his mum as an organist in church. And he was like, okay, well, that's the kick and that's the snare.
Yeah.
There's no drummer, so I just need to do this. And thinking back then, who'd have been playing flat wounds through some 18-inch speaker. It was just it wasn't.
Yeah.
We think of slap as Marcus Miller and Larry Graham and Flea.
Yeah.
Marcus Miller and Mark King and Flea, and that kind of bright sound. Yeah. But Larry's sound back then, even if you listen to that first Sly and the Family Stone record, it's flat wounds and a distortion pedal, and it's quite, that slap was about percussiveness, not about twanginess. And it's I guess it's even why there were still, like, I think Larry's one of them, people who react against the term slap. They called it thumping and plucking, I think they called it.
Yeah.
Rather than slap and pop. And it was like, because that sounds like breakfast cereal. Yeah. So they weren't into that. They were like, no, it needs to be. And so, but I definitely had that sort of functional thing to it. And so when I brought that to, like, I got to meet Jonas and Michael in the late 90s. I think I interviewed Jonas for Bassist magazine. So I can't really overestimate how significant getting a writing gig with Bassist was. That I ran into Gibson Keddy, the then editor, there was a bass shop in Mansfield, in somebody's house. I can't remember what it was called, Bass Emporium or something. I don't know, whatever it was. Yeah. But I was in there because I lived in Lincoln. Was I still in Lincoln at the time? But I must have been. No, I can't have been. I must have moved to London. Anyway, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was in the shop and he was, oh, you're Gibson Keddy. And he went, yeah. What? I said, you haven't got anyone who writes about tech and pedals and stuff, and I should do that. And he was like, the brazenness of it is hilarious to me now, because I spend an awful lot of time choosing not to do that. But I just said and he said, all right, write something and send it to us and we'll see. And so I didn't own a computer at the time. So I hand wrote this article, and it was a review of the effects I was using at the time was the ART Night Bass. Do you remember that? Pink fronted, so it's a 2U rack with this kind of neon pink display. Like, it was just the wildest, like, most 80s thing ever. But an amazing sounding preamp. Yeah. And so I wrote this review of it. I hand wrote it on paper and sent it to them, and I heard nothing back. And I was like, okay, maybe I thought it was crap. Fast forward 6 months, and it was the National Music Show at Wembley. And so I went up to them and I went, all right, Roger, I'm Steve. I sent you an article. He went, guys, this is Steve Lawson. They all came over and went, you dickhead. And I went, what? They said, you didn't put an address or a phone number at all. So I sent them something. They went, we really want to publish it, but we can't publish it until we can actually credit you and pay you for it. Yeah. So they said, they said it's really good. My partner then she was a sub-editor, so she really helped me out with all of it. Yeah. They said it's really good. Do one a month, but don't ever send us it on paper again. You need to get a computer. Excellent. And so I did. So I went out and bought a second-hand laptop off a friend who worked in IT, and that was me away. But what that meant was that I then got to. I was kind of so like I can't remember. I think it was the next year at the music show. They booked Mick Karn, Guy Pratt, and somebody else as special guests, but they hadn't actually booked anything for them to do. So I rocked up, having written for the magazine for a year, and went, I'll interview them. Just stick them on stage at a certain time. And so I got to spend time with Mick and Guy. And Guy's still a friend now. We came to BIM, the university I teach at here, a year or so ago, and we got to hang out, and it's and that was the thing that because. And I don't know if it's just a dispensation thing or whatever, but or just a sort of understanding what the journalist role was. I didn't ever do the fanboy thing, so I became good friends with the ones who were kind of my kind of people. So Jonas and I met then, and he was kind of abrasive, but we sort of got to know each other a bit. But then I went to NAMM on behalf of the magazine, and that's when I kind of started to sort of compile this community of bass players that if I listed them off, it just sounds like absurd name dropping, because they were just people I would meet and interview. Yeah. And I would go, oh, you're really normal and nice, and so then over the coming years, I would see them again, and they go, oh, you're an English guy, right? And I'd go, yeah, and I'd say, oh, I've put an album out, and I would give them a copy, and some of them were like, oh, cheers, and I'm sure it went in the bin or in a pile or got sold in a second-hand record shop. But there were others who went, wow, this is really good. Like, I really like what you're doing. And including Victor Wooten and Michael. Obviously, Michael I'd already connected with by that, and we were already playing together by then. But Jimmy Haslip took a bunch of my CDs to Japan to try and get me gigs once. Like, there were just... I realised that there were these just beautiful human souls in the bass community who weren't out just to kind of go, what can I get out of this? But were actually like, would recognise when somebody was doing something that they found interesting, that they thought was significant on the instrument, and go out of their way to help them. Because I didn't have a record label. I never had a manager. This was a self-produced thing, but I did make it look beautiful. So when I gave it to them, it was like, oh, this is like it was like a triple gatefold sleeve, because that's what Tony Levin was doing. Yeah. At the time, do you remember those Papa Bear Records releases that he did that were like mini vinyl? I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. So I was a magpie for ideas and inspiration. But I also had this trajectory of seeing the bass as a tool for music creation rather than as a circus show. Yeah. So my gigs were never heavy on kind of gymnastic displays. It was all and that's where looping came in, because it allowed me to think orchestrally. You allow me to think compositionally rather than going, okay, I need to play the Moonlight Sonata on a bass or classical thump or whatever it was. I was like, I was never going to be good enough to do that. I didn't, but the big thing was that there were things like that where I realized that the time that it would take me to learn to do those things was not reflected in how much I enjoyed listening to them. And I always, and this is still kind of top of my advice to anybody who's making music, is make music you want to listen to. Don't make music to prove a point or meet a market or, God forbid, get on a particular playlist. It's like, make the record you want to hear and assume that you can find like-minded people.
So I think that's an interesting point. And also, as you talk about looping pedals, that I think that's a good point to kind of direct you at sort of, I think you've always been an early adopter. So, we talk about looping pedals, and you were one of the obviously one of the sort of forefront of using that technology, but it doesn't stop at, it doesn't stop at kind of that technology. You've also, you've also used digital technology in terms of things like Bandcamp. And it's like, what I'm really intrigued about is how you've sort of kept on that crest of a wave in a way to sort of sustain a career. I mean, obviously, you've had this entry point that, you've had this great entry point where you've got to meet all these kind of amazing musicians. And I completely concur with what you said. One of the things that I've found about interviewing people is bass players are wonderful people. There's not a single person I've interviewed so far I would categorize as anything but just like an amazing person that wants to share their insights and their learning. So obviously you've had that, but then how does your career then move forward from that? And how do you sort of like, when did the whole Bandcamp thing, all this sort of the digital technology, and how did you embrace that to really kind of develop what you're doing?
So I guess there are a couple of key things that happened in there. So one of which was when I was writing for the magazine, one of the things I realized was that nobody was making any money at this, that everybody's money came from somewhere else. And that it was either doing clinics, so some of the bass players, but the people who were being like paid endorsers has always been a tiny fraction of people. Like, it's probably, weirdly actually, because of Instagram, it's probably more now than ever, because of the size of audience that Instagram can have. But at that time, there were a handful of people who had signature instruments that they were actually paid a royalty on, like literally you could count them on one hand. And everybody else was in this hustle, and but most of them had a day gig with somebody quite successful. So whether it was Stu Ham with Satriani and Vi, or Billy Sheehan with Mr. Big, or whatever, whatever it was, that people had a gig that gave them a platform, and then they leveraged that platform against whatever else they were doing. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I was really fascinated by the idea of doing it myself. And so, but what I also had at the time, and I still have to a degree, was a fairly, like, I don't like, I'm not good with abrasion and friction kind of in terms of what I have to do. So I was trying to position myself ahead of time and do the kind of apologetics on what it was I was about to do before I did it. And that's where the internet came in. So I joined, so in the late 90s, so my first proper solo gig, I'd done a couple of solo performances, like at the National Music Show on behalf of Bassist, and I did some background music for somebody's PhD dance performance. But my first actual show was December 1999. So in the run-up to that, I was on a mailing list called The Bottom Line, and I joined a couple of Usenet groups. So this is all pre-web forums. This is before TalkBass and ActiveBass and all those other ones that appeared afterwards. But I started to see that particularly within email, and we didn't call it this at the time, but there was parity between every contributor, because there was no designation of moderator or star contributor or celebrity or pro status. There was no paid tier. There was none of the semiotics of importance that we now see online. None of that was there. So what we had was just conversation. And so I was suddenly in this big conversation that included Carol Kaye and Tony Levin, but also journalists, Ed Friedland and builders, Rick Turner and Greg and Jeff Gould. And I was throwing my stuff in there. It was broadly meritocratic. It obviously favored people who were literate, English speaking, and also those whose kind of sort of presentation in the world meant they weren't at risk. So being a white able-bodied dude kind of helped. because because giving information away about myself wasn't putting myself at any material risk. So there was a bunch of stuff that I could do in that space that you know, intersectionally I was kind of well positioned to do all that stuff. But it meant that rather than looking for a record deal, I looked for an audience. And I saw the internet as a way of building that in a way that I didn't want to go out and do showcase gigs. I didn't want to go out and play. I've maybe done like a handful of restaurant gigs in my life. And I've always felt really uncomfortable because I don't want to play to people who aren't listening. I'd rather not play.
Yeah.
Like
no, I know that feeling.
One of my big questions has always been, in what way is this better than silence? Or like about any musical activity. It's like, how is this better than it not existing? And an awful lot of music doesn't pass that test. There's an awful lot of musical situations. That's why I'm not a big fan of jam sessions. I'd rather sit and chat to people and have a coffee than I would listen to them kind of. And it's not a moral failing. This is entirely an aesthetic thing for me. Yeah. What I found was that what I was able to do was to establish a kind of a space into which I could then make music. So I established an expectation with this internet audience. I built credentials and respectability by writing for a magazine, by teaching in a college, and then by associating myself with Carol Kaye, and who would then say, oh, this guy's teaching ideas are really great. And then I sent her a CD of a project I was on, and she said it was the best thing she'd heard in 10 years. So I had this sort of conferred significance from these people. And then I went to NAMM, and I was the first British solo bass player to go and play solo concerts in the States ever. So there were these moments that at the time was just me kind of going, oh, there's an opportunity for that. I'll push on that door. I'll push on that door. You know, I'd meet Michael Manring and you know, blurt out, oh, we should do a show together. And he was like, yeah, great, let's do that. You know, and it was just like, I was like, wait, what? This is you know, the single most important bass player in my development as a musician and conceptualizing what the instrument was, way beyond anybody else. And I'm staying in his house and we're talking about doing shows together. You know, so that generosity, that kindness was something that, rather than going, it makes me special, it's like, no, that's the way we behave. That's how we should behave. So I then became this community hub. So in 2001, 2002, I set up a thing called the Solo Bass Network, which was a website, because I knew how to code HTML, like really horrible. It's still there somewhere, ugly shit website. Anyway, but the Solo Bass Network website. And a mailing list. And the mailing list was like, send me your details of what you're doing with solo bass, album releases, gigs, whatever it is, and I'll mail shot it to everybody. Yeah. And I was like, because I was like, if this does well, I do well. If I focus on me, there's no social context for my thing. I'm trying to make myself special outside of this. And I always wanted to make music that was important without pretending that I'm special. Like I was like the idea that somehow I needed to be larger than life and significant was like, that was not the thing. What I wanted to do was to make music and then find people who shared my love of it. Like I was like, I've always spent a lot of time listening to my own music, and it's not narcissism. It's just that's why I made it. So back then I was kind of, so coming back to your point about technology, I was hyper aware of the limitations of every layer of community tool. And then a new one would open up. But also because of that desire to make it available, as soon as I started like a blog in 2002, I'd had but what was effectively a blog, but we called a kind of tour diary before that. Again, copying Tony Levin. Yeah. When I toured with Howard Jones in 1999, I started a tour diary, which I was uploading from hotels. But by 2002, it turned into the word blog had appeared, and I started as a blog. But I used a lot of that to talk about how I was doing this stuff. Like I didn't want to pretend that I had some arcane mystical knowledge that, or some status beyond anything else. It was like, no, this is how I was doing it. This is how I was making things. When TalkBass came online, I hosted Michael and I hosted an Ask the Pros forum on solo bass together. So again, like it was strategic in as much as that association with Michael made me much more significant. And probably got me coverage in magazines and radio playings because it was like, oh, these two are together, and this guy's the greatest who's ever done it. So this English child, so we'll give him a break. So, but even then, even at that point, there were moments when, in my conversations with Michael about what we were doing, there would be things that I was doing that he wasn't. That he'd go, wow, that's amazing, and I would be like, again, that generosity of spirit where he wasn't like, Like this is a kid, and I don't need to listen to what he's doing. I'm just helping him out. He was like, oh, there's things I can learn from what you're doing, and then and it would get to the point where someone would go to him and say, oh, how do I have a career as a solo bass player? And he'd go, do not ask me. Go and talk to Steve.
Yeah.
He's like because he's doing it in a way that is not just fumbling around, kind of because it took Michael a long time to establish that. But whereas I was fully invested in this kind of community tool model, this kind of idea of what in business terms would be, CRM, customer relationship management, But I was doing that so I was on TalkBass, and I was like, actually, I should have my own forum. So I just was like, okay, how do I do that? Well, there was a one-click install for a PHPBB forum, so I'll do that. And I set that up. And all of a sudden, like curious people for whom bass was the sort of center of the wheel, but there was all this other stuff, came and started talking about art and TV and politics and holidays and all kinds of stuff. And so I wasn't like, you have to talk about me, because that's a very limited frame for a conversation. But I was like,
of course,
what I want is a like-minded community who have come together around the watering hole of my music, but actually want to establish depth to that. And if I went on Blue Sky right now, the first thing that would appear that I would see is messages between people who met on that forum saying good morning to one another every single day. And I'm like, wow, flipping heck, that was I set that up 24 years ago. And there are friendships that have endured because of that. Yeah. And those people are still subscribers to me on Bandcamp. So the progression went through, mailing lists, public forums, self-hosted forum, then I had MySpace alongside that. MySpace, I sort of got it wrong. I did the whole kind of adding thousands of people. And other than meeting my ex-wife, that was quite fun. We met on MySpace. But as musicians, not as, I wasn't using it as a dating app. I was, there was nothing weird about it. But yeah, so, but then sort of 2007, 2008, I became part of a kind of tech community.
Right.
As well, that were kind of the people who were doing what I was doing, but in government and charity sector and business and all these kind of spaces. And so we was this wonderful guy in London started hosting a Friday coffee morning for tech experimenters, for curious tech people. And so I became a part of that. And through that would kind of learn about new things that were coming along, Twitter, Facebook, and all the kind of things around that. So Twitter was hugely significant. I mean, it's very difficult to overstate how important that was for broadening my community, broadening my platform, for becoming that poster child for DIY. That there would be articles in the Telegraph, and they would reference me, Amanda Palmer, Zoe Keating, and Imogen Heap. That would be the four that they would talk about as kind of people who were doing this stuff. And Imogen was kind of on the edge of it because she had a record deal. Yeah. But like Amanda Palmer, Zoe Keating, and me were sort of the main three. And it was like, this is nuts. This is insane. Like that. And I would get phone calls from newspapers, and I would be on the radio in the Midwest, kind of, with people going, we're going to go live to London now and talk to Steve Lawson. He's using the internet in quite interesting ways for a musician. It would be that kind of thing. And so I would do these interviews. But all the way through, I was exploring it. And then a friend of mine was an advisor to Bandcamp really early on, and he said, you need to check this out. And so I signed up in 2009, which I think was just after it launched, and very quickly was like, oh, hold on. This level of self-governance, like even the fact that your mailing list on there was yours. Like they didn't host, like on when I shut down my MySpace page, I lost 10,000 followers, friends, whatever.
Yeah.
There was no way of taking them with me. I couldn't export that as a list. Bandcamp gave me everybody's email address. Or, everybody who voluntarily had offered it because GDPR and all that. But like I had a mailing list of it that I could change the pricing on a daily basis if I wanted to. I could give things away. I could use pay what you want pricing to have a conversation about generosity and gratitude. And so so in the midst of that, I started talking about this whole concept of gratitude economy, because obviously the conversation at that time was about piracy being driven by the lobbyists who wanted to make Spotify the thing because they wanted to gatekeep the industry more and didn't like the fact that there was an open playing field. They were like, no, we're meant to control this. So that shift from a kind of more open, self-governed web to one where there was this kind of ubiquitous streaming kind of model where there was big industry players. I was involved in that conversation by saying the problem here is not Neil Gaiman's quote was what you have to fear isn't piracy, it's obscurity. And it's like, so if you can build an audience, if you've got 10,000 listeners and no money, that's a great problem to have. Because anyone on a label that has 10,000 listeners is 100 grand in debt to the label. And so it was like, well, if you can leverage this stuff to kind of get you an audience, and they're an audience that you're in touch with that you can contact, that's great. You can then start to experiment and be entrepreneurial about how to do that. And so I was used to pay what you want pricing a lot at the beginning then. And people would come in and pay me 10, 20, 30 pounds for an album as a way of saying thank you. It wasn't an expression of the value in the music because they could have just listened to that on Bandcamp if they wanted to. It was a way of saying thank you to me for making it and for presenting it in the way that I did. And so that, again, Bandcamp has been absolutely, from then on, has been the spine of the sort of economic model. Because what I also realized was that I had friends who were trying to make money everywhere, and they were like, oh, I'm going to have streaming stuff, and I'm going to set up YouTube Premium, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to have this platform and they would have Bandcamp and Patreon, and then and Medium and whatever there was.
Yeah.
And it was like, I was like, that, like, what are you hoping is going to happen? You're going to have like 10 super fans who subscribe to you everywhere because they're unhinged and want to be your friend. So there's sort of this sort of weirdly parasocial thing. Yeah. But where you're forcing them to pay you an awful lot of money in order to be in that position. So you're rewarding them with a fake friendship rather than leveling the playing field and then being able to establish real friendships because nobody's in a position where they're 200 quid in the hock to try and pretend to be your friend. This isn't a meet and greet after a gig. This is just, if you give me 30 quid a year, I can keep doing this. It was about sustainability. And as a result, I have genuine friends. These aren't parasocial relationships. I have genuine friends that came to me through the subscription. Yeah. And people I hang out with, people who've hosted gigs, people I go and stay with, people who come and stay with me. It became, because community emerged as the context and the reason for why I made music. It was like, what I want is I want a steady state in which I can continue to do this sustainably. I want a bunch of people who understand what I'm doing so I don't have to keep apologizing for it like I was doing in the early days on The Bottom Line. I wanted people who were like, okay, we get this. And I also wanted their reflection on it to become part of its reason for existing, but also the way we understood what it was. Yeah. So when somebody said, oh, I listened to, there were people who gave birth to my music, people who got married to my music. There's a bunch of other stuff I probably don't want to hear about. But there were people who would use it for road rage. There were people, to kind of calm themselves down in the car. And that utility, particularly the social utility, when people would put it on, I have quotes from some of my favorite musicians, the incredibly famous musicians who've heard it at dinner parties, said beautiful things about it that I can never repeat because it was just in a private context. And I could, if I was an arsehole, I could go around kind of quoting what people said at dinner, but that seems to me to be wholly unethical. But because people would use it in that way, because it became like ambient music in the realer sense, bits of it, but other bits were things that people would focus on, bits that would get people through really difficult times. And I've got friendships that are based on those conversations. So that social utility and the technologies that made it possible, both open social media technologies, closed forum community management technologies, just music distribution technologies, which went through this path. And then I just went, I'm going to stick it all here. So anybody can listen to it for free without you don't need a subscription, you don't need an account, you can just go and hear it. And I can price it based on discovery, not on exclusivity. Because for me, at the moment, the fact that so many people are charging £8, £9, £10 for a CD, which then gets 20% added on top for that. Oh, no, not for a CD, for a download. That's insane. How are we making a case for people leaving Spotify if we're saying, oh, by the way, every penny of what you were spending on Spotify now needs to go on one album? No, what's the cutoff point? If we bought 5 records a month and invested time in them, Like that is socially, functionally, musically a kind of a not a bad replacement for a subscription. And so what's that work out at? £2 an album, right? So I was like, great, I'll stick my flag in the ground there, and I'll make it £2 a time, so that people can go, actually, I kind of like what this guy's doing. I'll give him £2. But there's also the option to pay more if you want to. And the number of people who do is nuts. You know, there are people who again, and it allows for a multiplicity of relationships with the music. There are people who subscribe to me and have subscribed to me for 10 years now, who probably listen to the same records over and over again. There's probably 3 albums in there that they love, and they keep subscribing to me because they want me to keep doing it. There are other people who, a week after I put out a new album, are like, when's the next one? I'm like, really? Like, wow, you're insatiable. It's great to have that desire, but it's also like, that's a bit nuts.
Yeah.
But then there are other people who will go, actually, I don't want to subscribe, because what I want to do is I want to pay deliberately and with intention for the things that I love. So they will go, actually, so a record will come out and they'll go, man, this one's amazing. And I'll go, thanks. And they all are, but I appreciate that. And they'll buy that one, and they'll give me 10 or 15 pounds for it, because that to them is what, like, I don't get to impose on them what the value metric is. And if I was charging, like so many of the subscription models now are about monthly charges, and the standard minimum monthly charge for so many things is £5. I'm like, wow, that's double what I charge for a year for my entire life's work. And that's somebody's basic level access to their blog, not even premium content. Really? How many people can that sustain? Who's going to be doing that to 20 people? Because that's £200 a month. I know, wait, that's not a £5 a month. My maths is terrible. That's £100 a month. Yeah. Who's got £100 a month for reading blogs? Nobody. So that's not realistic. So how do we make this? It's back to what I did at the start. How do I make this work for everybody? So I will price my stuff in a way that is not only about the audience, but it's about demonstrating what communal activity as a musician looks like. How do we as musicians make it sustainable for us all? Because as a song title of mine said in 2006, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Like, this has never been about me innovating in a way that makes me the winner. Like, I've never wanted to do a thing with my career where I come out on top. Because there's been loads of opportunities when I could have done, when there were things that I could have done, there were things that I could have pursued that would have led me in that direction. And I would have made more money, and but I would have made worse music. And, you know, as weird and hippie and idealistic as it sounds, I was like, no, I want to protect this. That my metaphor for this, because I realize I'm just yakking and you're not getting to ask questions, but I'll stop.
Don't worry.
My metaphor for all of this from almost 20 years ago, so 2008, I think I started talking about this, was a biodiversity model. That the strength of an ecosystem is the breadth of what it can sustain. And I was like, great. So I want more music by more people in more places. That was when I was with New Music Strategies, which was a kind of think tank that I was a part of for a while. That was our thing. Was like anything where people are like, fewer people should be making music and releasing music. We were like, let me stop you there. That's a really bad take. Like maybe we need better filters. Maybe we need better discovery mechanisms. Maybe we need better community tools so we can share what we like. But actually saying that human beings should be making and releasing less music is terrible. That's an inhuman take. And if that makes life more difficult, that's okay. Because for every one of those people, that really matters. Because music, at its most basic level, is communication and therapy. Before it's a business, before it's a performance, before it's an economy, before it's an industry, it's a way of communicating and connecting, and it's therapeutic for the person making it. And so that has, or for myself, that's always been my focus. Like, how can I build a community that I can communicate with? And how can I keep making the music that makes me feel like I'm connected to the world?
And I think there is so much in there to unpack that I'm not going to, because I think it's just, I think when people listen to that, there's so much to take away from it. There are things I don't necessarily agree with, but I think there's so much to take away from that I was just happy to let you keep going. One thing that sort of comes off the back of that, I suppose, is where we are with the internet now, and this kind of like ties, I suppose, to sort of around innovation, and also ties back to what the stuff we've just talked about is, certainly from, to put it in context, from a bass playing perspective, I now see many more people that are kind of doing what you did with the bass in terms of taking it to another level, exploring its boundaries and pushing its boundaries. Do you think it's easier now to be innovative in the way that you have been with the instrument, but also are we in this position? I think you sort of alluded to that as in the last section we were talking. Is it also becoming so diverse in terms of all the platforms that we've got out there that actually it's kind of hindering that kind of innovation at the same time?
Right. Let's see if I can make sense of that, because this is such a huge thing, and the headline answer is I don't know. That there's a part of me that is, so I always have sort of three takes on everything: a utopian take, a dystopian take, and a pragmatic one.
Yeah,
that's always, I'm trying to draw those three lines and understand what they are. And at the moment, the dystopian one is the big vision, because we're not in a good place. Like, we're not in a good place creatively in terms of because a lot of what looks like innovation is actually just sleight of hand. That playing an instrument has become a magic trick. I watched a video yesterday of a guy on a bike riding up a ramp, letting go of the bike, catching a bar hanging onto a ceiling, and then someone threw him a basketball, and as he dropped into a pit of sponge, he caught the ball and scored a basket. Completely insane one-off thing that they probably spent 10 hours doing because it would get views and likes. It exists for that. Without the audience, it wouldn't exist. And there's an awful lot of music now that exists for likes. That there's no, it doesn't exist for a song. It doesn't exist for a thing. It's mixed to sound good on somebody's phone because they're making it for the platform. So there's some stuff that is genuinely, in the initial moment, incredibly impressive. There are players who are doing things, and within that, there are people who are doing things that I think are genuinely creatively deep and meaningful. I think Nathan Navarro has a take on rock bass playing that will endure. I think that will actually shape the way that we think about the instrument. But there's an awful lot of stuff where you might as well be wearing clown shoes and having a hat on the ground in front of you, because it's just like, and it's all in 20-30 second chunks. And I go, where, like, and if you say, where's the version that nourishes my soul? And you go, yeah, well, it's not meant to. You go, yeah, but why is nobody doing that? Why are we using systems that constantly platform and prioritize like an absurd level of showmanship over any expression of our shared humanity at all? But the world is a right mess right now. And the people who are actually making art that expresses that are getting in what the American senator John, what's his name, would have described as good trouble. What's his name? What was it? I can't remember his name. Anyway, but yeah, there are people who are putting themselves on the line through their art to do that. And that has some cultural cachet and stickability within that world. But the vast majority of what I see is the equivalent of a guy on a bike grabbing a bar, dropping, scoring a basket, and landing in sponge. And it's like, and I'm like, I don't begrudge that existing. Like that, like I don't, in the same way I don't begrudge these kind of amazing feats of human endurance, like or mad kind of trick shots and things like that. Like that's, it's not a bad thing that exists. but what is the wider ecosystem of which it is a part? And if the ecosystem is just musical trick shots, if there is no game of pool in which those trick shots get used, if it's just the exhibition match, if we have the Harlem Globetrotters but no LA Lakers, to kind of go with an American analogy, if we have somebody who can do 10,000 keepy uppies with a ball but can't actually strategize a game of football, where have we ended up? And we've ended up with thousands. That there's just an imbalance, and it's very difficult because I don't want to point the finger at any one person. I don't want to go, that person shouldn't be doing that, because for some, and especially for the younger players, like it's how they've been socialized into the instrument. They've watched 20-second clips, so they make 20-second clips, and then but they're wearing T-shirts with album covers on them. You're like, when did you last listen to an album? Like, when was the last time you actually sat down for 45 minutes without being distracted? And so I think that there's a kind of a public. We talked a lot about the kind of public mental health crisis, but there's a public attention crisis.
Yeah,
that is stopping us from producing art for people with long attention spans. And so, in the same way that I think it was Ethan Hawke was recently talking about the fact that Netflix has a directive that you have to restate plot points at a particular interval, because that's when people check their phone and miss bits. So TV shows end up with these really obvious things, like no one's doing anything subtle anymore, because they're not allowed to, because the expectation is. And I'm saying this as somebody who occasionally does that, who will go to Wikipedia because there's a thing on a screen. I'm like, what if I see that person in before and miss the next 5 minutes of the film? And so it's not. This isn't me sitting on the outside as somebody who's got some sort of sage life where I kind of, where I use my phone for half an hour a day, and it's like, no, I don't, because it's addictive. And even talking about it, like, this is the thing that I'm going to do a video about on Instagram, because why not be solipsistic about the whole thing? But like the fact that doing videos that tell people not to spend time on Instagram, the only reason they're allowed on Instagram is because they don't work. Because if they worked, Meta would block them, because Meta's a business. And Meta is not a platform for social good. It's not a platform for a mental health advancement, or it's business. It's
a money-making machine.
It's the rawest of businesses, and it's one that will, Google's motto used to be "First do no evil." And then there was a point where they went, well, maybe a little bit of evil, and then they're like, maybe if evil is where we make our money, let's just do evil.
Yeah.
Let's go all in, feet first. We're just going to be evil. And you're like, and Meta's gone exactly the same way, and so when we post these things about going, get off, touch grass, take your time away from the internet, go and diversify your community and get involved in these things, like, it's all peripheral, because the stuff that gets promoted is the stuff that will keep you in the app. And that's the thing. If we keep listening to inspirational speeches inside Instagram, why would we leave? Because those inspirational things make us feel good. Multiple people telling us that we should leave Instagram makes us feel like we're enlightened, even when we haven't left. So this is why my headline is, I don't know, because I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know how to do that. But what I do know is that the short-term manageable response is small-scale community building, not mass movement. And that actually it's about me and some friends going, why don't we organise a meet-up for bass players in the West Midlands? So I've got a friend in town, a guy called Caleb, an amazing bass player and fantastic human being, and we're talking about kind of organising this sort of West Midlands bass player gathering. And it's like, because time in the same room as each other really matters. And then if anybody plays to us in that setting, it's not something that they've done 4,000 times, edited, thrown into an AI, and then spat out this polished version of to make us feel bad about ourselves because we can't do it. It's them actually bringing a work of art where they can play for 5 minutes and the people in the room can appreciate that. Like, just to carve out a space for that is quite radical. To carve out a space where it's not dominated by the loudest voices. Where people, like, because one of the things that I've always said about music online is is this good for introverts? Does this platform work for introverts? Because if it doesn't, it's no good, because there is no causative relationship between being extrovert and being a great musician. Some of my favorite music was made by people who were really, really shy and really screwed up. Like if Paul Buchanan from the Blue Nile had to make short form content, you know, at the time when he was writing those records, and they were records about coming off heroin and trying to find himself again, or Mark Hollis from Talk Talk.
Oh, exactly.
Or Robert Smith when the Cure were making Pornography and Head on the Door. Like he wasn't about to be posting pictures, selfies. Like that's not, like when we require that for somebody to be heard, our cultural experience is diminished. And as somebody who, again, this is where I guess this is kind of where we transition into academia, as somebody who cherishes the difficult work of allowing research to inform opinion rather than the other way around. I look at this and I go, the research basis here says that we're fucked. I don't know if you need to edit that or not, but like, but we're not in a good place. And I know that I could actually get that I could, because I'm good at it, I could do an inspirational talk about how to use these things. I could be doing lessons in how to build an Instagram following. But while I'm actually wanting to do the opposite, when Instagram tells me that no videos over 3 minutes are only going to be shown to my followers, I go, great, I'm only going to do videos over 3 minutes. Because I don't want randos turning up in my comments trying to argue with either music or commentary without any context. I don't want that. I would much rather have a slower growing community where people came into it and then went, okay, let's talk about that. Like, and for me, the dividing line that is binary. It's good faith versus bad faith. Is this a good faith conversation? So my choice of who I will talk to on a podcast is governed by that. Like if I get the vibe that somebody's content is about stirring up argument or fomenting controversy because that's what gets clicks and views, I have no interest in that. How is that good for me or the world? Even if I ended up with 100,000 followers out of it, like that's not. I don't need to be there. I don't need that, and I don't need that level of. I don't need to be doing. I don't need to be the idiot whisperer who's having to kind of respond to all of that, or just to curate it in a way that means I block and delete comments. I don't have to do that. I want to be much more intentional and deliberate about the curation of a community of people who actually care about one another, who want to. I don't mind disagreement. And I have a lot of friends who I disagree with about all kinds of things, and that's good. But is it a good faith disagreement? Are they coming to me because this is how they think the world will be better, or are they coming to me because they're like, well, I'm willing to lie to defend this particular point of pride? Or I'm willing to lie about this because I'm a misogynist or a racist. And it's like, yeah, no, I don't. Like, until you let go of that and until we can actually have a conversation around what Nye Bevan said and the Manic Street Preachers quoted, which was, this is my truth, tell me yours. Like, if that for me is the heart of that community discussion that's been happening since the late 90s for me online, has been, I want to tell you about why, as honestly as I can, about how and why I'm making this music. I want to invite you to make your music, and I want to help resource you in doing that. And then we're all better off. Everything's richer as a result. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, that sense of I love this kind of the idea of it's building the communities. It's not this whole thing of it's not this whole thing of chasing numbers and chasing clicks and chasing, And I know that we do that to a certain extent because it's about building income. But no,
yeah, absolutely, and that's the thing that we need, that is so unresilient. Like I have so many friends who are winners in that space, and I'm really glad for them. There's a former student of mine who went from 300 followers to literally 300,000 followers in a month because she had a viral hit, and it's now her career. And she put out a couple of singles with labels, and now she's just gone, actually, I can do this myself.
Good for her.
Because she can now do, if she wants to make bullshit makeup adverts or whatever, or clothing sponsorship deals for 300,000 followers, she can make bank off of that. She can and if she's smart about it, she can build resilience out of that. That's great. But I don't want that to be the mechanism. I'm so glad that in a space where we have no control, there are good people doing well out of this. But I do not want to foster a space where that becomes where what we're doing is making clothing and makeup adverts in order to get to make our music. I want something more sustainable than that. I want something that sustains people at a lower level, because with 300,000 followers comes a whole load of other nonsense. I don't want 300,000 listeners. Like I genuinely would not want 300,000 people listening to me, because that doesn't happen in a vacuum. And with that comes a whole bunch of people going, which I've had for 20 years, people going, you know what you should do? You should do a funk record. And it's the kind of Harry Enfield character appears and goes, you don't want to be playing bass like that. You want to be playing it like this. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Like I didn't wake up one day with a hangover and a bunch of bass gear and go, oh, well, you know, like this is, and when people say, you know what you should do? My response is, no, you should. Because it's you that wants to hear that. If you have heard something lacking in my music that makes you go, it should be like, brilliant. That's the only way I listen to music. Like whenever I listen to somebody's music that doesn't do it for me, my reaction is never to tell them what not to do, because their creative path has taken them to that point where that's what they value. And that's a beautiful thing. That's an amazing thing. But what I do is I go, great. My taste is being triggered like this. It's almost like an inoculation against blandness. And I've gone, if I do something a bit like that, I'm going to add this element in, and that's what's going to give it strength. If I do ambient music, I'm going to make it more melodic. If I do jazz adjacent music, I'm not going to use bebop vocabulary, because that's always my least favorite bit of when everybody does that. And it's not that they shouldn't do it. I would never turn around to somebody who does those things and say you shouldn't do. Why would I try and shit on somebody's 30-year journey with the instrument?
Yeah.
Like that's an insane arrogance to do that. And yet social media fosters it and rewards it. So that's why we're back to, I don't know. Because we're trying to use a platform that is hell-bent on destroying our social cohesion to try and form social cohesion. And so I don't know. But for the moment, it's like, well, what can I do with what's in front of me? I can be kind. I can make music with intention. I can talk about how I do that. I can use the tiny ring-fence spaces that I have, mostly the Bandcamp subscription, to talk about those kind of purposeful things. I can refuse to move my blog onto Substack because yet another colonized space online. It's like, no, I'm just, my blog readership is one, possibly two orders of magnitude smaller than it would be if I put it on Substack. I'm a really good writer. I've done a lot of it over the years. That's evidenced. So I could write a Substack that got me tons and tons of followers. I often read, kind of music blogs and hot takes and things and go, I could spend my time responding to these. I could have an entire YouTube channel that was just all the ways that Rick Beato is wrong about everything. Like I could like that. But
I love it.
What a terrible way to spend your life.
Yeah.
I don't need to do that. That doesn't help anybody. If you cut that out and make that the video, we're both going to go viral, and I'm going to end up with the why does Steve think Rick Beato is wrong about everything? It's like, just watch him. It's clear. But like,
I love it.
But like, the like, I don't want to do that, because that's a bad faith argument. Like, and when you see people going on what are pitched as moral crusades about other musicians, and you go, this is still part of your grift. You're trying to build your own audience for being the justice warrior in this. It's not even social justice. It's just a kind of this person has transgressed the laws of music. And it's like, yeah, but you're bringing no journalistic integrity to this at all. You're just building your own fiefdom. And it's just, and again, it's like, alongside the good faith, bad faith thing is like the cynicism versus optimism. Yeah. Is this an open-hearted exchange? Is this a chance? Because I'm deeply committed to redemption narratives and everything. Like I want people to do well. I want people who have been, for whatever reason, through desperation or just good old-fashioned human greed, have gone into a kind of crappy situation. I want them to find a way out. And I want them to find peace, and I want them to find a creative expression that isn't cynical and isn't destructive and doesn't rely on putting other people down or stealing other people's work, whether it's kind of, if we're looking at the AI situation. But that, so I always want people to kind of come out of this. I want people to do well. I want to see transformation take place. But that's really hard on social media because when you do it, you people end up doing it performatively, because it's like, oh well, I can get clicks for doing that. If I'm visually apologetic enough, or if I stage my own hijack in this encounter, then I can get 10 million views and I can monetize that. And it's like, oh man, when everything becomes a side hustle, including our own spiritual growth, it's like you've got to ring fence part of your life that is not for that. Like I lived my life very publicly, pre-algorithm.
Yeah.
Everything in my life was online. My kid had my son had a Twitter account before we told the family my ex-wife was pregnant.
Wow. 9
weeks he had a Twitter account, 11 weeks we told everybody.
Yeah.
Because we were like, we can have fun with this. His name was never online, but it was but because it felt like this meritocratic play space in which we got to do fun stuff. And nobody got 100,000 followers overnight. So there wasn't the fear of sudden overexposure. Like there was a sense that things grew in organic ways and through being interesting and engaging in community activity. And then the algorithm dropped in 2012 on Facebook and Twitter, particularly Facebook. And then Twitter's kind of ramped up over the years. And the whole thing got worse and worse and worse. And it's like there was literally no upside to any of this. There was nothing about this that has made our lives better. Like we're just being milked like some dystopian sci-fi film.
Yeah.
Like, for
that yeah, exactly. But so that's quite an interesting point to kind of sort of feel like I'd sort of there's a couple of directions I'd like to point you in, but I feel like one of them we might
up and let me go.
Well, one of them we might not have time to. So I'm just going to kind of cut to this kind of like. So, what advice do you have for bass players, particularly coming into this industry at the start of their careers? What are the sort of key things that you think they should focus on, they should do, and sort of, I suppose, imparting that wisdom of some of the really tough lessons you've learned along the way, because obviously, you've had a really interesting journey through all of it, really. So I'd be interested. I'd be kind of. I think it'd be really enjoyable to kind of explore that.
Great. Okay, so let's see if we can do this as a list, but in no particular order. So number one is goal setting. You have to have clear, actionable, and missable short, medium, and long-term goals. Vague desire to be better, to do a certain thing, to reach a certain point.
Yeah.
Utterly worthless. Completely worthless. And by short term, I mean, what I've sent down my instrument. I've got half an hour to practice. What do I want to do at the end of this half an hour?
Yeah.
Write it down. Yeah. When you miss it, don't beat yourself up. Go, what happened?
Yeah.
Analyze it. Be intentional. Be responsible about that. Short, ultra short, medium, and long-term goals, and then start to build process around those. That's number one. Number two, set aside time for active listening. So put your phone and computer and everything in a different room. Put something on that doesn't have ad breaks. Put a record on it. It can be a concert. It doesn't have to be an album. It could even be a playlist. Like I don't really come from a playlist culture, but I've spent the last year and a half listening to a playlist that a friend did for me almost constantly. Like the same 65 tracks going round and round and round. And it's taught me so much. So listen, set aside time for active, intentional listening away from distraction. That's number two. Number three, build local community. Like we're still in a time when it feels like foreign, unknown listeners to our music are somehow like worth two local people. Like somebody in your town listening to your music is worth less than somebody in wherever. There was a time in the early noughties when my biggest audience in the world was in Santa Cruz, California. That was what why would you have a big audience in a place that cost you 700 quid to get to?
Yeah, exactly.
What a foolish thing to do. Why wasn't I building that in London? And then I ran a night in London. I ran a night called the Recycle Collective in London, which again was about building community. And all of a sudden, and that community sustains. There are still relationships that I built in that are core part of my musical world now, because I was like, okay, I need to focus locally. So build local community, and in that local community, think about what you can do for the community, not just how you can leverage it for your own thing. Like actively spending time thinking, like naming your own selfishness. Where are my obsessions? Where do they come from? And acknowledge that whenever some old kind of Gen X dude comes in and says, take time for this, like that when I was doing that, life was cheaper. Like I obviously didn't have the internet distracting me in the 90s, but also rent was a tiny fraction of my income. Food was a tiny fraction of my income. I wasn't struggling to keep a roof over my head. I could do minimal outside work and pay my bills so that I could spend time on music. That's not possible now. So be realistic about what that entails. But also realize that sometimes music as a day job gets in the way of music that you care about, and an actual day job is better for your music. Nels Cline was working in a record shop until he was 50.
Yeah.
He'd won successive polls in the biggest guitar magazine on the planet as the greatest experimental guitar player. Year on year on year, he would win. And when he came off tour, he was back in Amoeba Records, working there, or in a bookshop. Wilco was the first time he didn't have a day job.
Wow.
So, but he did that because that allowed him to play the music he cared about. So sometimes an actual day job is better than a wedding band or a covers band, because if you're playing every Saturday and Sunday night with a wedding band, you can get good if you do that. This might be my next point. But it will be happening when all the rest of what you should be doing as a musician will be happening. So the next point is play everything as though the music matters. Make the music the thing, not you. This is a lesson from Danny Barnes, who's a banjo player from Seattle, and wrote an amazing blog post called "How to Make a Living Playing Music." 17 years old and still the best advice I've ever had. And one of the musicians is make the music the thing, because if the music is the thing, you will do whatever it takes to make the music possible. And if you're the thing, there are things that are beneath you. You go, I shouldn't be working in McDonald's. I shouldn't be working in a coffee shop. I'm better than that. But if you go, no, in order to make the music possible, I'm going to do that. You go, great, then I'll do that. And Philip Glass who drove a cat taxi? Michael Nyman, one of the composers. Like long after he was famous, he still drove a cab. Yeah. Like that's there were people who Cecil Taylor, piano player, washed dishes because he didn't want to play standards gigs in a restaurant. He was like, no, I'd rather wash dishes in a restaurant and play weird music than ruin my playing by playing, background music. So having that sense of every bit of music you play, make it matter. Because I love doing wedding gigs, because those are amazing tunes. If I'm playing chic tunes and Stax and Motown and even Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran, those are really great songs. And there are lessons to be had in playing them well. And the feeling of doing a good job, if you want to be a professional, you need to be more concerned with the skills required to do a good job than with your own aesthetic relationship with the music.
Yeah.
So when I'm playing in a band with somebody else, my only concern is, are they happy? Not how would I do it? There are times when I'm asked to bring my creative practice to it. But when you ask that, but never assume that if somebody wants me to play like I've been playing in a stadium rock band for my entire life, I can do that. If somebody wants me to play like I was like it's a late 60s blues record, I can get that sound and I can play that way, and I won't add anything else in there. Because making the person who's hired you happy, whether that's the artist or the management or whoever, like that's your job.
That's a biggie,
doing a good job, elevate that over your own aesthetic concerns, because you can play music that you think is bad music, and you can play it well, and it can be deeply satisfying. Because the extension of that is to then work out why it's good. Work out why those people want it to be like that. because then you expand your space. And so when I bring to those kind of gigs is that listening without prejudice that I learned from John Peel. It's that thing that allowed me to enjoy the Bundu Boys and Extreme Noise Terror. Like that was like that. I brought that with me to everything that I did. So be deliberate about your social media usage, and realize that anyone who argues with you is asking you to do homework. And are they somebody that you would accept homework from? Is taking homework from strangers a good thing to do? And also, you're doing volunteer work for the platform when you do that. Like, is Meta somebody you want to do volunteer work? If you want to do volunteer work, go and find a charity. Go and find somebody who needs supporting. Go and find a neighbor that needs you to do their shopping. Don't be doing volunteer work for Zuckerberg. He doesn't need it. No, so absolutely. Use it strategically. Use it to build community, and use it to pull things out elsewhere. But don't get frustrated when the platform blocks you from sharing links or blocks you from talking about events, because that's the only reason it exists. You can't use a platform that is built with one economic model in mind and then be angry because they won't let you do it. It's like trying to stage a concert in your local Aldi. Go, well, but this is a big space. It's like, no, it's a shop. Yeah, but I want to put a gig on. Yeah, but you can't. Well, you're Nazis. Like, no, they're not. They're just a business. And so they do what they do. And Meta, it happens to be an evil business, but it's just a business. So they are going to block anything you do that tries to extract audience from there. So use it to build an audience. Use it to talk about community inside it, and then hope that when people hear about you outside, they make the connection, because you will struggle to make that connection between the two. Because there is an awful lot of skill and billions of pounds of investment designed to make it as addictive as possible.
Sure.
So limit your time. And yeah, I don't know, just kind of focus more on being a decent human than being a decent anything else. Like that
comes up a lot.
Yeah, and it's a cliche, and Charlie Hayden said it years ago. If you focus on doing good and helping people, then maybe one day you'll be a great musician. But it's absolutely true, because and it's also and it's a cliche, but it's good business strategy as well. But because it's long term, because I know people who did really, really well in the short term by being incredibly selfish, by being utterly driven and trampling on everybody else. And there were a number of people who did very well long term like that. There were a number of celebrities who whose story is littered with them having been ruthless and unpleasant to everybody around them. That's not the majority. Most of us rely on community at a certain point.
Yeah.
And if that community doesn't exist, we're screwed. If you're a music student, so I have students in college, it's like, you want to get to the end of college and be the best musician you can be. The thing I asked of my students in their first week is, I said, I want you to be open to the possibility of greatness. I don't need you to be great by the end. I just need you to think about what the process is that would get you there if it happened. Because otherwise it's a pipe dream. We're back to our short, medium and long-term goals. But it's like, be open to the possibility of greatness. But the number one thing that you need, the number one characteristic that you need when you get to the end of college is trust. You want people to go, yeah, I would trust Steve to be the guy that will show up, whose gear will work, who will learn the songs, who will look good on stage, and will, and will wash before he comes on the tour bus. Like, that's what I need. Like, those, like be that trusted person, because you can be fantastic. There are fantastic musicians. Me and the staff at college talk about this all the time, because a lot of us have opportunities to hire students. It's like, he's a great player, but just, I wouldn't trust him to show up to the gig on time. I wouldn't trust him to show up not stoned. Like, really? Like, what a terrible way to lose opportunity. Like, be somebody who builds community, but also be somebody who, when someone sees you play and sees you do your thing, goes, yeah, I trust them. Because I've given tens of thousands of pounds worth of work to former students because they were the ones that I trusted. There are people who've built careers off of gigs that I put them up for because because I'm not doing it as a favor. Because the times when I've recommended somebody and they've screwed it up, it comes back on me.
Yeah,
people are
exactly.
Like, why did you recommend them? I don't recommend anybody as a favor. When somebody says, can you help me get a gig? I'm like, I can help. I can put you forward for a gig that I think you're the right person for. But no, if you're a shambles and you are unpleasant, or you are somebody who is going to be it's going to say inappropriate shit around the rest of the band. It's going to be, just a liability on the road. No, I'm not going to put you up for a touring gig. No way. If you come into college and your guitar is constantly broken, if you turned up with a broken jack lead 4 weeks in a row, no, I'm not putting you up for a session gig. Because you are not paying attention to those details that matter. And if you have, if we've got to the end of the first year of term and you haven't bought an interface for 30 quid, so you can learn how to record at home, what are you in this for? What are you doing? Like there's so much in that, and it gets harder every year to spot those people because the I remember when the National Lottery launched in the early, well, it was mid-90s, wasn't it? There was a spate of kids saying, that for years, firemen and policemen have been the top two jobs that kids wanted to be. And all of a sudden, the top thing that kids said when they wanted to be for a number of years was, I'm going to win the lottery.
Yeah.
They just went, I'm going to win the lottery. And now it's influencer. Now it's that there are tons of musicians who are like, yeah, I'm going to build a following on Instagram. Go, you and who else? There is a finite number of hours available of people's attention. So Meta, will strip it down so that they can extract enough metadata from your interaction with it in 2 seconds, so they can show you more stuff, extract more metadata, and sell it to advertisers or to whoever, whatever nefarious organization wants that data. That they're going to chop that in, and so your 2 seconds within a 4-hour stretch of somebody doing something. That's not attention. That's not somebody caring about what you do. If you want to make art that matters, that is not the model, my friend. And it's back to being a lottery win, because I've seen, like I said, that student of mine who suddenly got 300,000 followers. She's doing great. But I'm not looking at her and going, hey, everybody, do what she did. Hell no. Because it's not sustainable, and it makes life really difficult if you want to make art that you care about. And unless you want to make art that you care about, I'm not the person you should be asking for advice. like there are certain assumptions that are that I'm gonna make that say, if you want me to help you, because it's the same with students, that when I'm teaching somebody to play bass, it's like, what do you want to do? And I'm very student centered, very much kind of about, like, I don't have a method book. I don't have set lessons. Every lesson I teach begins with, what have you been playing this week? And then we build on that. And I've been teaching for 30 years. So, I've got an awful lot of experience there. I'm fortunate I'm able to do that. But if there's a bunch of stuff they want to learn that is things that I know somebody else who does it better, or they want a degree of structure and external validation that I'm not willing to offer. If somebody comes to me and wants to do graded exams, I'm like, you can either listen to me and I'll tell you that there are better ways of learning.
Yeah.
Or you can go to somebody who teaches that, if you're committed to that, because there are great teachers who use that model. Mine is not the only way to learn, but it is the one that I'm committed to, and I don't need to fragment that for the sake of an extra few quid a week. So,
let me throw one kind of final question at you, which I'm gonna.
We've got 2 hours left, so let's have one more question.
Only 2 hours. It better be a short question. No, so I'm going to rephrase this slightly and direct it specifically sort of towards the conversation we've been having.
Right.
So normally I say pick, one bass line everyone should learn, but due to the fact that what you said earlier, it's kind of like, make time to go away and sit and listen. So what is one piece of bass music that you would suggest everybody goes away and spends time listening to? And it can be anything.
The full version of Papa Was a Rolling Stone. The 9.5 minute version of Papa Was a Rolling Stone. And spend your entire time focused on the fact that this is not edited. This is not comped. This is not looped. This is one person playing that line while all of that other stuff is going on around them. in the studio and is sat on it.
Mm.
And then think about what they could have done. In fact, use Moises to take the bass part out and play as many different versions with fills, with a solo, with slap, with chords, with whatever. Just load it up with every single thing you can possibly do, and then come back and listen to the original again.
Mm.
And realize that not, and it's the thing here isn't that simplicity is always best.
Mm. Mm.
It's what Tony Levin calls the good note.
Mm.
That there are often a whole range of right notes.
Mm.
The things that can be justified theoretically, where you can go, oh, well, I did this and I did this substitution to it and I did that and then I came back to that and I played 5 against 4 for that run down to there. None of those are bad things to do. Which is the good one? Which is the one where you go, yeah, like, because and I mean Tony's a perfect example of this. Somebody who plays things that we all could have played and none of us did. Like I remember having this conversation. So I'll add a second tune to this. So Papa Was a Rolling Stones one. Second one, which is an example of this that happened in a conversation in the 90s, is a tune by a band called Iona, called Edge of the World.
Is that the Iona as in Nick Beggs is?
Exactly, yeah. So this was the thing of Nick's, and in the middle of this tune, Edge of the World, there's a bit where the sax player Mike Houghton, who I ended up playing with years later, and Nick play this little unison figure, da 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 da. And it's just beautiful. It's just perfect in the spot. It's soprano sax played. He's a kind of real Garbarek kind of embouchure to the way that he plays. And Nick on fretless. And I remember sitting this friend of mine going, God, isn't that beautiful? It was back in the days when friends would come in and you just listen to a record.
Yeah.
That was a social activity. And we listened to it and he went, you could do that. And this was, way beyond my level of philosophical engagement at the time. And I turned to him and said, yeah, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And he was like, and it might even be the first time I ever said anything that was kind of, significant in that way about music making.
Yeah.
Because it was like, yeah, it's not what you can do. And that's the Instagram thing. Like there's a ton of stuff on there that I could sit and learn to play if I wanted to. There's no reason to do it. There's absolutely no reason to do it. And so like what I want to do is the thing where people go, wow, that's beautiful. I go, great, you could do it. Go learn it if you want to. Like my music is deceptively complex. I've never wanted it to sound difficult. But no one ever covers my music because like how could you? Like how could you do a decent like you'd have to distill it to such a basic sense. There's probably the opening tune on my last album on the album Amsterdam. The opening tune on that, which is called Aerialism, like you could probably cover that. Like that's probably playable start to finish because it's just that kind of tune. It's just I could sing the whole thing. But almost everything I do relies on such a complex kind of range of technology. But when you listen to it, you go, there's nothing difficult happening here. The relationship between the layers is infinitely complex. But what is happening is that I'm focused on articulation, phrasing, on storytelling, on the in and out of every single note. And it's all improvised. So that affords me the complexity of not remembering. Because if I needed to play it again, I'd have to simplify it. That's why I stopped. That's why I stopped playing tunes on gigs. Yeah. And went back because I was like, every time I had to play a tune, the album version was like super complex and nuanced and beautiful. And then I would learn this simplified version of it to then become a live thing. It's like, why don't I just make something new up?
Yeah.
When that's what I'm good at. That's what you've been listening. What you've been listening to is not tunes, it's invention. So let me do more invention. And let me train my audience. This is back to the audience thing, to not expect to hear the same music over and over again, to come with an openness to newness, to go, oh great, I get to hear what this new stuff, and that's all in the PhD. That's the conversation that happens with my audience that's transcribed in the PhD. Yeah. But yeah, so Papa Was a Rolling Stone, the 9-minute version, start to finish, with a focus on the fact that this isn't looped. This is a guy sat there playing it deliberately, and then Edge of the World by Iona. Yeah,
brilliant, excellent choices. And unfortunately, I don't have time to talk to you about the PhD. There was
Well,
a lot.
we could do part two.
We could do. Well, I think I might have to split this into 2 parts anyway. So we might actually be doing a part three.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
But I am really kind of, and this is just, you don't need to answer this. I'm really intrigued about the PhD and kind of how it's kind of influenced, how it influenced you and how it's kind of influenced your attitude to it.
I can give you the quick version. Yeah. Which is that, because the reason I did it was because I wanted to make better music. I didn't do it because I needed a PhD. I did it because I wanted it to be a frame for me to dig deeper into what I did and why. And so from that emerged this awareness of the audience's role in it. And so what I realized was, and I was able to refine through studying it, was the nature of that relationship and how curating that and focusing on that the theoretical model that I come up with at the end is it uses Stuart Hall's media idea of things being produced and encoded with meaning and then decoded, and then adds to that the idea that the audience re-encode it with their own meaning. So it's not just a detached, kind of mass media production, and then an unknown audience doing it and responding to it in the public sphere, which is what he was writing about with the BBC. Instead, it's actually within a closed community that I make it, I invest it with meaning, sleeve notes, stories, whatever. And then the audience goes, this is what it means to me. And then I understand my own work better. And I make new work in response to that. Yeah. But that happens in what David Dark, who's an American cultural critic, refers to as the space of the talkaboutable, which is a beautiful phrase, beautiful poetic phrase. And he talks about the space of the talkaboutable, and he talks about how great literature expands the space of the talkaboutable. You read a good book, and there are options to talk about new things off the back of reading that book. There's an invitation to an engagement with the topic. And so I said, well, what happens if that becomes if the concept of the space of the talkaboutable becomes a thing that we conspicuously engineer around the production of art and the release of art. So I was like, that's what I've been doing for 27 years. Is manufacturing and curating and nuancing the space of the talkaboutable so that conversation happens in ways that aren't controlled by me, but into which I'm placing the music as what Yuri Engstrom would call a social object. It exists to engender sociality, that these conversations happen around the music, and that conversation becomes part of the work and is invested in the music, and I make new music in response to the sum total of that, of what's happening in that space. So that's what the PhD came to, and I just got better at doing it. I've just got better at doing it. I've got better at listening. I've got better at responding, and and also more adamant that I don't want to do anything else.
That's fabulous. Yeah.
That there is no other model that I'm interested in.
Well, it's a fabulous and kind of wonderfully life-affirming way to, or career-affirming way to kind of end the conversation, really. So, but no, Steve, thank you so much for your time. I've genuinely enjoyed every minute of that.
Thank you. It was really fun to do. It's really helpful. Like, there's a reason why musicians are so happy to chat on podcasts, and part of it is sort of benign narcissism, but it's also that chance to go, where is my thinking out on this? I'm really looking forward to listening to this back.